Mm-hmm. Pardon? Recording. I don't know. For sure. I want to close down my screen. I guess they're not there. I'm the only one here. Is that, am I right? I'm the only one here? Mm-hmm. Come over here. What? Am I the only one here?
So far. Why don't you raise your seat up?
I did, but I don't like it again. Here, look. Let me show you. I don't like it. Be up here. I don't like that. Okay. Okay. It has to be this way. If I complain, tell me to be quiet. Tell them like. What happened to the pussycat picture that used to be there? You took a copy of it. Did you ever take that out of the copy machine? I just saw the big space there. Your coffee is good. Oh, here we go. Hiya. This is
Hiya, how are you?
Okay, hi. I think we're the first two. Here goes Aaron. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron. This is my third Zoom thing today.
Wow. You see what a social butterfly you are?
Oh, yeah. And I was thinking, when am I going to find time to do laundry? And then I remembered the laundry room is like 6 feet away in the bathroom. Kind of weird.
Yes.
And I haven't been outside all day. I was gonna, but something happened and I couldn't do it. And I don't know.
Hotter than Hades outside today.
I know.
Go to the bathroom before the class.
I already have.
Aaron.
I was just reading that we should be celebrating Mr. Trump's birthday.
Really? How old is he? Any idea?
He's in his 70s.
70s? Okay.
24, 75, yeah. And there's going to be an editorial in the New York Times tomorrow by two doctors who have figured out he's going to announce that there's a vaccine right before the election.
Of course.
That may not work and it may kill a whole lot of people, but that's okay.
This is killing a lot of people. The social distancing and
I hope there's going to come someday before my next birthday in January, but I doubt it, that I'll be able to see people three-dimensional.
They're talking about a year before they get a vaccine.
Oh, I know.
It's amazing. But yeah, so
But the weird thing is, like, you go to the grocery store, you see three-dimensional people that you don't know. But the people you know, you can't see three-dimensional.
I know. Our new norm is really an adjustment.
That's putting it polite. I miss being able to see people, to talk to them with spontaneity.
Exactly. With the freedom to see them and to be the gathering and the socialization has been just decimated, gone. But my thing is there are 43 million boys and girls out of school. come September, how do you social distance?
Well, other countries have done it where they divide the classes. So actually you need more teachers and you have space between desks. And I know in some places where it's warm enough and they could do that here, you have much stuff outside as possible.
Okay, now what about college? 45,000 students on a campus. How do you do this?
Everybody's got their own computer and they'll do it the way they did it this spring.
Yeah.
They would send
No,
home
they never did it.
The socialization
did. My
part of
grandson-
college is gone for now.
Yeah,
They did their classes online.
but you know what happened? Okay, spring break came. They shut down the universities. Everyone was home, or most of them were home. And then they said, do not come back.
What?
Okay, so they quickly put together, they bastardized the system to be able to give them their courses online.
Mhm.
Okay, that was then. Now you have a whole new group of boys and girls again.
Hello, hello, hello.
You
Hello.
shut down universities, you shut
Mhm.
down colleges.
Yes.
You're not gonna-
A
you're not
friend
gonna
of
take
mine
the-
that I worked with her daughter is finishing her freshman year at UCLA. And they're going to be online this semester. They were last semester. And Judith, my friend, said, well, her daughter already has friends to talk to, from her first part of the year. But people just, and she's been back here in Houston, but I think she's going back to California. But people who don't know anybody, remember freshman year, you didn't know anybody?
Right, orientation, gatherings, getting together.
Mhm.
Right, all right. Well, anyway, good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
folks.
Hello, man in China who looks vaguely familiar. Hello, Joyce.
Hi, Susie.
Erin, how are you?
Not bad. And you?
I think she's frustrated.
It sounds it.
I don't think we're adjusting. It's a new norm, and we're older, so we don't. But you know what it's doing to all of these young teenagers who can't socialize, who have no life. They can't go out of their home. They have no place to go, no gathering for social interaction. I mean, you're talking about the teenage years, which are enough of a difficulty in just your body growth and your hormones and all of that. And then you shut down their whole world. They couldn't
I think
go to
it's
the
not enough
library.
for us. I love these classes, but I would love them better if we were all gathered around a table together.
Yes.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
No. And it's not going to happen for a while. I had a doctor's appointment with an actual live appointment last Monday. And I asked my doctor, how long does he think we'll be with masks? He said he thinks we're going to be masked till the middle of next year to some degree or another.
Yeah,
And then you go places
That's right.
where they're not wearing masks.
Oh.
That sounds about right.
What, calling them idiots? Mhm.
That we're gonna go, that this stuff is gonna continue till at least halfway through next year. Not all of it, but some of it.
Well, I hope a time will come when we can get together. I don't anticipate we'll be able to get together in the shul for services or anything for quite some time.
I think that's probably right.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Oh, there are the Wieners. Hi, Wieners.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
Hello.
And hello,
Hi,
Ed.
Gail.
Oh, there's
you
Ed.
doing?
Hello, Ed.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Sandy.
Can everybody
Hi,
see the handout? Can everybody see the document, Communist Mobilization of Russian Jews? Everybody seeing that?
Yes, it's there.
Yes.
Good.
Haven't seen it.
Okay.
It's on the screen.
I see it now.
Okay.
Hello.
So we're going to wait just 1 or 2 more minutes. The
We're not hearing you, Aaron, if you're talking.
document covering my clock, so I know. Okay, I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The document's covering my the clock on my computer, so I can't see what time it is.
It's 4:59.
4:59, yeah.
Okay.
The clock on my radio, on my whatever it is, and the real clock, old-fashioned real clock in the living room say that.
The old thing. Everything we have is old-fashioned and antiquated, but lovely.
Somebody went gray.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I think
Hannah went gray.
now it's so
Martin, I thought you would have moved to another tourist spot since this morning.
Now, I like this one. This one's very nice.
It is.
Okay. 1 more minute, okay?
okay,
All
comrade.
right.
Hello, Al. All right.
Hmm?
Hi there.
Hi, Leslie.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Okay. So this class is called Communist Mobilization of the Russian Jewry. Now, the Russian Revolution liberated what was at that time the largest Jewish community in the world. It also opened the floodgates for the greatest massacre of Jews prior to the Second World War, due to the Civil War after World War I. Jews also entered into nearly every sphere of Russian life. And in time, in a very short amount of time, much of the singular richness of Jewish cultural life in Russia was flattened and eventually obliterated. That's what we're going to cover in the class today. What do we have that's background sound?
I think I muted it.
Okay. So how did the Bolshevik Revolution create new opportunities for Jewish social advancement? Well, first of all, the Soviet leadership fired, deported, displaced, and killed many of the old elite that surrounded the Tsar. You need people who are somewhat educated and knowledgeable to run a state. You need people to set up and manage the new legal system, schools, businesses, factories. And the fact of the matter is that the non-Jewish proletariat was rarely up to the job. So the Jews were able and willing to make use of the opportunities afforded after the Russian Revolution. Now, what were the ideological principles of the Bolshevik Revolution? Well, at the beginning, right after the revolution, the thought was that there was going to be a series of revolutions throughout Europe until all of Europe became communist. Now, that didn't last very long because of two events. First, there was a communist revolution in Germany that failed after World War I. And secondly, the Red Army was defeated at the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, which stopped the Western movement of the Red Army into the rest of Europe. And to a lesser extent, Trotsky settled for revolution in Russia and to make Russia the leader of the communist movement in the world, and walked back the idea that there was going to be an imminent world communist revolution. However, in Russia, the Bolsheviks wanted to create a new socialist man who would be above petty nationalist divisions. And remember, in the class after class, I've been talking about the number of different peoples in the Russian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So that the idea of the Russian Revolution was that sooner or later, and they hoped sooner, these nationalist divisions would end in favor of an assimilated socialist man. That a new form of universalism would be created that rejected any form of separateness and particularism. Lenin, in particular, rejected the idea of Jewish nationalism.
It's after 5. It's after 5.
He said the idea of a Jewish nation was essentially totally false and reactionary. So this brings up the question, was Lenin an anti-Semite? According to historians, there's no evidence that he was. For example, in the Fourth Duma, 1912 to 1917, Lenin led the Bolshevik initiative to annul all restrictive measures against Jews. On the other hand, Lenin viewed all forms of Jewish nationalism and separatism as reactionary phenomena that deflect Jewish workers away from revolutionary solidarity with their non-Jewish comrades, and from the struggle for the future revolution to overthrow all class barriers and finally solve the Jewish problem. Thus, early on, under Leninist nationality politics, the goal was to re-socialize the Jewish population so it would become politically Bolshevized and sociologically Sovietized. What did that mean? That Jews should consider themselves part of the Soviet family of nations rather than part of the worldwide Jewish community. Now, before you can create this wholly new, historically unique Jewish community, you have to do a few things. One, destroy the old order within the Jewish community. Secondly, revolutionize the Jewish community. And third, reconstruct or Bolshevize the Jews into a new Soviet order. So how did Lenin, Trotsky, and the Communist Party think about doing that? Beginning in 1918, two organizational forms shared power to achieve these goals. One were the Jewish sections, and the second was the Commissariat for Jewish National Affairs, EVCOM. Now I want to talk about EVCOM, the Commissariat, first, because that was always envisioned as a temporary administrative organ to reconstruct Jewish national life on a proletarian socialist basis. And as far as EVCOM was concerned, most of the people in the EVCOM were not Jewish. They attempted to spread Bolshevik propaganda and ultimately failed due to their lack of knowledge of Yiddish and the Russian Jewish community. And the second form, which had a much, much more of an effect, and a deleterious effect on the Russian Jewish community, were the Jewish sections of the Communist Party the Evreyskia Sektia, or the Evsektia for short. This was created, the Evsektia was created in 1918 to reconstruct Jewish national life on a proletarian socialist basis, integrate the Jews economically, socially, and politically into Soviet society. And the one thing to really understand, it's very important to understand about the Evsektia, they were Jews, the Evsektia was Jewish run, and the Jews who ran the Evsektia were, to quote, more Catholic than the Pope. They were diehard communists who had no love for the Jewish people, no love for the Jewish religion. So how do you begin to tear down the traditional Jewish community and make a new Jewish national life? Well, you start by weakening primordial attachments. Still in 1918, the majority of Jews had not urbanized, had not moved to the big cities yet. They still lived in smaller territories in part of the old Pale of Settlement. So the Evsektia disbanded Kahila structures, closed down synagogues, halted all Zionist activities, outlawed Hebrew instruction, helped halt all private enterprise, ended many traditional Jewish occupations, and caused a massive population shift to urban locations. So let's pick apart this a little bit, because it's very important to understand what happened and how it happened. By 1921, all political parties in the Soviet Union, except the Bolsheviks, were either liquidated or rendered effective. And that included the Bund. And remember in the last class, we talked about an explosion of Jewish political activity. The Bund was very popular in the Jewish community. So were the Zionists. The Evsektia outlawed them, and the outcome of that was the Evsektia now had a political near monopoly on the Jewish street. They were entrusted with the task of the new social mobilization of the community. And so one of the first things they did was they went to the local kahilas. They confiscated the kahilas' money and inventories of membership. And by law, the monies in the inventories had to be were forced to be turned over to the local Evsektia. Then they raided all the offices of the Zionist organizations in their particular geographic territory. Zionist leaders were arrested, questioned, and initially released. All records of membership and activities were turned over to the Evsektia's liquidation committee. And the term is exactly the way it sounds, liquidation committee. At the same time, Jewish clerical, political, economic, educational, and cultural societies and organizations were ordered to cease operations. Now, this included all adult education classes. So if in 1921, I had been teaching this class and you had been taking this class, guess what?
Yep. You'd be in prison.
Yeah. Or at least called into the local Evsektia office and asked, why were you attending this adult education class? All Hebrew schools were closed. Why did Evsektia dislike Hebrew, the Hebrew language, so much? Well, there's two reasons. Number one, they identified Hebrew, the Hebrew language, with the class enemy, the bourgeois. But probably more important, they identified Hebrew with the Zionist political persuasion. Now, according to historian Zvi Gittelman,
Aaron, question.
yeah,
So all of these had a particular Jewish slant to them because of the Zionist movement and so forth. But did the communists also try and disband any organizations of Chechens and
Sure.
White Russians and what have you as well?
yes,
Similarly?
yes, we'll get to that in
Okay.
the class. I'll talk about that. And if
Okay.
I don't, remind me a little bit later on, okay?
Okay.
Because we talked about that in the class this morning. Somebody raised that very point.
Okay.
Okay, so according to historian Zvi Gittelman, that's a very good question, by the way. The campaign against Hebrew was initiated by the Yevsektia, not by the Soviet government or the Communist Party. That's kind of interesting. Chaim Nachman Bialik and other leading Hebrew writers were constantly harassed by the Yevsektia. So much so that either in 1923 or 24, I don't remember the exact date, Maxim Gorky, famous Russian writer, not Jewish, tried to secure permission for 18 prominent Hebrew writers to leave Russia. But the Yevsektia blocked his attempt. It was only after the Cheka is the Soviet secret police, by the way. It was only after the Cheka chief finally intervened that the leading lights of the Hebrew literary world were allowed to leave Russia. Okay, I'm wrong about the date. I have the date here. It's June 1921. Now, I want to refer you to a text here. In 1925, and these 18, there were other Hebrew writers that were able to emigrate. But there were also a group of Hebrew writers who stayed in the Soviet Union. One of them was a Hebraist, Yaakov Mipamni Ashni. And in a 1925 letter, he wrote, I will say in Gordon's words, he's talking about A.D. Gordon, who was one of the leading Hebrew culturalists in the second Aliyah. I will say in Gordon's words, I'm a slave to Hebrew forever. No one will be able to uproot Chumash and Rashi from my soul. I gave the best years of my life to these old writings, but here I stop and go no further. I return the Torah to Mount Sinai, even though I know we remain naked without it. But how long can one be a tyrant over oneself? Ah, it is indeed bitter. It's pretty touching. And that's basically, there were accounts of Hebraists writing new books, papers, and articles in Russia after 1921. The problem was there weren't a lot of people around to read them and share them. And for all intents and purposes, that was the end of Hebrew and Hebrew education in Russia.
Hey, Aaron, Aaron, I have a question about this Yevsektia. It sounds like it was an independent organization, but how did they exist outside of Lenin and Trotsky and the leaders of the Soviets? They were actually had their own leaders? How did that work?
Yeah. Well, again, they were part of every nationality had these sections because at the beginning of the Russian Revolution, they still had the problem of how to integrate the various nationalities into the state. This time, instead of the Tsarist state, into the new communist state. And so at the beginning, under Lenin, and hang on, we're going to get to that in just a minute. There were two wait a minute, can you hold on just about 5 minutes and we're going to get to that, Al. I'm going to answer that
Okay.
question for you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, the most tenacious resistance to the revolution was from the religious community. Now we're going to go into an answer to the question that was raised previously. The Avexia was anti-religious and anti-clerical. Now, they looked at it as part of a totalitarian organization. They could not tolerate any existence of a competing, dissenting, or different ideology. So how do they go about attacking the Jewish religion? Well, first of all, they mobilized a press campaign. There was a constant stream of articles and vicious cartoons. Some of these cartoons were so vicious they would have been branded anti-Semitic were it not for the fact that they were published by Jews in Yiddish language newspapers. They also conducted a series of show trials. And these weren't real trials, these were actually pageants in which various costumed characters made charges against Judaism and the Jewish religion. And of course, at every one of these show trials, the Jewish religion was found guilty and sentenced to death. Legally, they required all religious organizations to register with the authorities and submit membership lists. Rabbis were deprived of the vote. Religious instruction for all those under 18 were made illegal. In 1922 and 23, over 1,000 heders were closed, and religious instruction went underground. Now, to answer the question, were the communists anti-religious across the board? Yes, they were. But two things to understand. Number one, that the Avexia were Jews, anti-religious Jews going after Jewish religion. And they went after it with a vehemence that even caused Lenin to write, "They're going better than we could have ever hoped, much further than we would have ever dared." Did the same thing happen, for example, in Central Europe, in Central Asia, with the Muslims? Now that's interesting because it really didn't. First of all, the sections, the nationalist sections, took a much more measured and slow and gradualist approach to attacking the Islamic tradition in the Central Asian republics. There were two reasons for that. Number one, because there were still several Central Asian republics that were fighting violent upheavals against the Communist Party all the way to the mid-1930s. And the communists did not want to give the more pliant nationalities any reason to join these uprisings. So they went about proletizing, Sovietizing the Muslim community much more carefully and much slower. And the other reason was they didn't find a whole lot of Muslims that were willing to take on the role of making these programs, these anti-religious programs. In 1924, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
In 1924, the communists,
Okay, Aaron, but I
Yeah.
still don't understand. Okay, so they were given free reign by the Soviet leadership to do whatever.
yeah, hang on, we're getting to this right now.
Okay.
Okay. In 1924, the Communist Party began a program of nativization. All communist cultural and political organizations had to conduct their work in the local language. Although the Jews did not have their own republic, In 1924, the use of the Yiddish language was promoted. So for a very few years, you had an increase in the publication of Yiddish newspapers and books. However, the Yiddish press in the Soviet Union failed to strike a large audience. Why? It was because they could.
Oops, not hearing you.
Schools. Okay, there was a huge growth in Yiddish schools from 366 in 1923-24 to over 1,000 in 1929 and 1930. But even though the language of these newspapers and schools was Yiddish, subjects like Jewish history, religion, and subjects of Jewish content were excluded. So these schools and these newspapers were, quote, communism in content, Yiddish in form. All right, now to answer, Al, your question directly, I told you we'd get to it. There were two Soviet approaches to national issues, and this emerged early on. One was a gradualist approach, as exemplified by Bukharin, who was one of the early communist leaders. The gradualist approach to the national issues controversy was modernization of Soviet Jewry and other nationalities as a gradual process. That economic rehabilitation could be accomplished by starting with agricultural colonization instead of large-scale industrialization. Now, the other approach was Stalin's approach. Stalin said, no, strengthening ethnic identity and promoting parochial cultures would slow the dialectic process of history. Stalin was a revolutionary who believed in the rapid attainment of maximalist goals. So that's why Stalin did not support a widespread program to settle the land. Stalin supported a program of industrialization, heavy industrialization, as quickly and as soon as possible. Okay, you have two Soviet leaders. Now, Stalin did not have total power at this point, okay? That's why you had two approaches that vied for power. The Yevsektia tried to steer a middle course. They came out with a statement that industrialization should remain the main path to socialism, but land settlement was also a legitimate path. Now, land settlement, how do you settle Jews on a land when they have no territory, like other nationalities in the Soviet Union have? Well, to solve this problem, they proposed two choices of lands to settle Jews on: Birobidzhan and Crimea. Now, who knows where Birobidzhan is located?
All the way towards Mongolia.
Yes, it's actually in Siberia on the Chinese border.
Sounds like a great place for Jewish settlement.
Exactly.
Should have picked Crimea.
Crimea might have been better. However, it's important to understand that Birobidzhan was chosen as the area for Jewish organization. And it's important to understand that the Birobidzhan settlement was not initiated by any Jewish organization. It was initiated by the Communist Party. The reason? The communists wanted to develop the area militarily and politically. And that was the main reason for the approval of the Birobidzhan project. It was approved as early as 1925. And the first group of settlers went out to Azerbaijan in 1926. However, there was no preparation for settlement out there. So the first colonists faced a terrible situation. The nearest place that they could get any farm implements and machinery was in Baku, just hundreds of they even had to import horses. If you can't get machinery there, how are you going to till the land, sow the land? You're going to use horses. There were no structures out there. So there was no protection from the rain, from the biting insects, and from disease that the insects carried, which killed the majority of the horses. Of the first 654 settlers who arrived in the spring in 1925 in Azerbaijan, 325 remained by October of that year.
Aaron, we talked about this, I think, a couple of classes ago. So every ethnic group, or I think the Soviets used the word nationality.
Yes.
Had a language and a place.
Right.
Ukrainians, White Russians, Chechens, etc. And then the Jews were this outlier.
Right.
They had a language, Yiddish, but they didn't have a place.
Right.
The Soviets decided we'll give them a place. We'll fix this problem.
That was the idea. Now, that idea kept, even with this first failure, Stalin becomes the supreme leader in 1927, putting to death, exiling all the competition. So Stalinist totalitarianism started taking shape. That meant one very strong, unified, firmly centralized ruling party, which could not abide pluralistic allegiances and competing loyalties. So it's important to understand, in the early 1920s, the Soviet system could tolerate multiple and divided ethnic, institutional, and even ideological loyalties. That's why the Yevsektia was organized. By 1930, barely 10 years later, all competing or autonomous tendencies were viewed by Stalin as unacceptable expressions of dissent from the system. This meant all the national sections had to be gotten rid of. So how does Stalin do that? Well, let's talk about in particular the Yevsektia. Stalin accused the Yevsektia of, this is a great term, right deviation. Now, any of us who have had in their wild and woolly youth exposure to various leftist groups, either in the United States or in South Africa, or for that matter in Israel, are familiar with the term right deviation. That meant whoever didn't disagree with Stalin, plain and simple. The Yevsektia was accused of right deviation, including toleration of petite bourgeois moods and bourgeois motifs in literature, as well as opposition to collectivization, denigrating the role of the party and the state in agricultural colonization, and the worst charge of all, Jewish chauvinism. The Communist Party's Central Committee dissolved the Yevsektia in 1930. Are we surprised by that? No, not at all.
So did this mean that they were going to sort of Russianize everybody?
Yes.
At the end of the day?
Yes, but they were now going to do it not through a nativization program. They're going to do it strictly through the Communist Party and not through these nationality sections. Those were finished by 1930. So to sum up, and we're not finished, but to sum up, you had a decade in which communist, Jewish, Yiddish literature in the Soviet Union flourished. But it was a dead issue, essentially, after 1930. A dead issue after a while anyway, because even when you had Yiddish newspapers in the Soviet Union, they didn't have really a vibrant leadership or readership. According to Yuri Sletskin's Jewish Century, by 1939, this is between 1930 and 1939, although 1.8 of the Soviet population was Jewish, Jews owned 32% of the shops in Moscow, accounted for 15.5% of all Soviet citizens with a higher education degree, comprised 20% of the doctors in the Soviet Union, 30% of all the writers and journalists, 30% of the retail branch managers, and so on. So at the same time, as I said at the beginning of the class, that all the old religious, cultural, and communal institutions were being destroyed in the Soviet Union, there was an incredible urbanization and economic upward mobility and assimilation of Russian Jewry. In short, many Russian Jews no longer saw themselves as Jews, but Soviet citizens. And this basically all took place within a relatively short period of time. Before we take any questions, I have one more thing to say. You know, we talk about the lasting culture of the Sephardic Jews who left Spain and went to the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and the Balkans. And we wonder how they kept even the conversos, remnants of Jewish culture. How is it that in one decade, there was such a loss of culture among the Russian Jews? It's something to think about, isn't it? Any questions?
Well, Aaron, if you eliminate the schools, the haters, etc., that's it. You have no Judaism left.
Well, you eliminate the communal structures, the schools,
the haters, what do you got?
the politics, the culture, the books, the history. You know, we call ourselves a historical people. When you eliminate Jewish history, the learning of Jewish history, you destroy a people's identity. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they came from. And that's the one thing that the Soviet system did extremely well and tried to do among all the nationalities in the Soviet Union. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Aaron, I have a question about what was going on in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. They were not part of the Soviet Union.
Right.
What was going on there? Was something similar going on? When did they become communist countries?
After the Second World War.
After the Second World War. So that did not happen to them yet.
No, it didn't happen. Now, also, it's very important to understand that even though that in the Baltics, in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, 90% of the Jewish community that lived there were destroyed by the Nazis, 90%. Okay? So all this basically, and the Jews had to contend with nationalism in the Baltics. That was a whole nother ball of wax. And the same thing, they had to contend with Polish nationalism, especially in the mid-1930s onward to the outbreak of World War II. But that's a different story. Even though the Jews had to contend with nationalism in the Baltics and in Poland, there wasn't this relentless to wipe out Jewish culture and religion that you saw in the Soviet Union. Any other questions?
I just have a comment, Aaron.
Yeah, Betty.
This is Betty. It's very interesting listening to this because I am thinking of what happened in Cuba.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that, thank God, there hasn't been the same kind of situation as far as the Jewish community, even though, you know, changes, of course, have occurred. But I am thinking of the way that they have acted in terms of communism with the country in general, not the Jewish community.
Yes. Actually, you know, this is another class, and not in this particular series. But the important thing to understand about communism is the Stalinist Sovietizing of the nationalities stood as an example of how a totalitarian system gets rid of multi-ethnic minorities in a totalitarian communist state. If you look at what's happening in China now, you have echoes of this with the anti-Christian and the Falun Gong, the campaigns against the Uyghurs. You can't have competing loyalties in a totalitarian state. By definition, it is not a totalitarian state. And communism, at least it's practiced in China and used to be practiced in the Soviet Union, is a totalitarian political system.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When we were in China, I started this picture. This picture's from Southwest China towards Vietnam. And when we took that tour to China, we had a local guide who showed us around this area of China near a place called Guilin. And he said he looked Chinese in the way you typically think of Chinese. So what kind of group you belong to? He said, well, it's an ethnic group that lives in that part, much more closely aligned with Vietnamese than Chinese. I said, well, how big is your little ethnic group that you're talking about? He said, 13 million.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get rid of 13 million that easily. And this guy said negative things about the people in Beijing to a bunch of tourists that I would never have believed.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Oh, yes, I have one more. Do we know, I'm sure that you know, the writers that left in, I think you said it was in the early 20s, the ones that left Russia,
Yeah.
Where did these people go?
Well, Nachman, Bialik went to Israel. I assume all of them went to Israel, but I don't know. I would have to get the names of all the 18 that left.
Well, that's okay.
That's a question. But I would imagine that most of them went to Israel.
Okay.
Where was Shalom Aleichem, Aaron? Because he came to this country.
Yeah, but don't forget, he wasn't a Hebraist. He was a Yiddish.
Yeah, sure. He did come here.
Yeah, he came here. Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Same place next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was
God
great,
willing.
Aaron. Thanks a
We'll
lot.
see you then.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron. Have a good week.
Thanks,
Thank
Aaron.
Thank you. Be well, everybody.
Yeah,
Okay.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Aaron, are you going to send out the notes to everybody? He's gone. Okay.
He's gone, I think.
He's gone, he's gone, he's gone.
All right, he's gone.
Have a good week, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
You too. Bye.